The year is 1957. You are standing on a mountain ridge, shrouded in a cool, persistent mist. Welcome to the eastern highlands of Papua New Guinea. Below you, a vast, chaotic ocean of green jungle stretches in every direction, broken only by the sharp peaks of other mountains just like this one. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the sweet perfume of unseen blossoms. The silence here is a living thing, punctuated by the cry of a strange bird or the drone of a million insects. For most of human history, your world has been contained entirely within these jagged, imposing valleys. Imagine you've just made the long journey here from the outside world. Until the 1930s, your people, the Fore, were almost entirely unknown beyond these mountains. Now, you've arrived after a punishing trip on a rough track, carved from the mud and rock, a path navigable only by a sturdy Land Rover or a sputtering motorbike. As you travel deeper, you feel the 20th century peel away. There are no power lines, no paved roads, no sounds of distant traffic. The journey itself tells you that you're entering a place that has, until very recently, been kept separate by the sheer force of its own terrain. For the Fore people who call this place home, this isolation wasn't a choice, it was a simple geographic fact that shaped every aspect of their lives. Your destination isn't a single large town, but a scattering of small villages and even smaller hamlets, nestled into the more hospitable slopes. You see them as you approach clusters of round, thatched roof huts. Wisps of smoke curl lazily into the damp air from cooking fires. The sounds of the village reach you now, the murmur of voices in a language you don't understand, the squeal of a pig, the laughter of children. This is a community, a close-knit world organized around subsistence and family. Their entire existence is pulled from the rich, volcanic soil beneath your feet. For generations, this is how it has been, a life of profound connection to the land and to each other. Now, you are witnessing a world on the brink of astonishingly rapid change. According to patrol officers like Gordon T. Lindsley, who began making regular contact in the early 1950s, the old ways are already shifting. Inter-village warfare, once a constant feature of life, has nearly vanished. You see young men who seem relieved to be laying down their bows and spears. A new, rudimentary economy is emerging. You might see someone carefully tending to a small patch of coffee plants, a cash crop that can be traded for steel axes, tobacco, or a precious container of kerosene. Through it all, the Fore people have adapted. Somehow, they managed to navigate this sudden influx of new tools, new ideas, and new people. But as you settle into the rhythm of this place, you begin to notice something else. A shadow is falling over these villages, a mysterious and terrifying affliction that the Fore people have a name for. They call it Kuru. In the cool, grey light of dawn, you wake up inside your hut. Your home is a circular structure of wood and woven cane, with a thick grass roof that rustles softly in the breeze. The air inside is hazy with the lingering smoke from last night's fire, a smell that clings to your skin and clothes. Your bed is a simple mat on the dirt floor, perhaps softened with leaves. As you rise, the sounds of the village waking up filter through the walls. You hear the soft thud of a woman's hands preparing dough and the low grunts of the family pigs, which are a cornerstone of your social and economic life. For you and your family, the day's work is about to begin, and it revolves around one very special plant. That plant is the sweet potato. About 150 years ago, its arrival completely transformed your society. You walk out to your family's garden, a plot of cleared land on a steep hillside. The soil is dark and crumbly in your hands. This crop, unlike the taro your ancestors grew, thrives in the highland conditions, and its introduction led to a massive increase in food production. This agricultural surplus allowed your people to raise more pigs, replacing the need to constantly hunt wild ones. You spend your day tending these gardens, your hands and feet caked in mud, cultivating the food that will sustain your family. It's hard work, but it provides a reliable foundation for your entire life. Don't worry, your diet is far from monotonous. A study conducted in this very year, 1957, found no evidence of clinical malnutrition among your people. In addition to the staple sweet potato, your meals are incredibly varied. You eat other cultivated vegetables from your garden, like beans and corn. You enjoy the rich meat from the domesticated pigs, a food reserved for important feasts and ceremonies. You might also supplement your diet with small wild animals you trap in the forest, or even protein-rich insects. Life here is not a desperate struggle for survival for the most part. It is a life of abundance, provided by the land you so carefully manage. Now, your role in this daily routine is clearly defined. If you are a man, your responsibilities are the most physically demanding. You spend your days clearing dense jungle to create new gardens, a task that requires immense strength. You also hunt, and in times past you would have been a warrior, defending your village. If you are a woman, you are the primary gardener. You are the one who cultivates the sweet potato patches, ensuring your family has food. You are also responsible for raising your young children. The village itself reflects this. You see a large, central house where the men and adolescent boys live and socialize together. Scattered around it are several smaller houses, where you, if you're a woman, live with your young children and other female relatives. This structure provides both community and a clear sense of order to your world. In your Fore community, you don't answer to a chief or a king. Look around your village, you won't find a palace or a ruling family. Life here is fundamentally egalitarian. Your society is not built on a rigid hierarchy of power, but on the bedrock of kinship and mutual obligation. This isn't a world of subjects and rulers, it's a world of relatives and allies. The most important law is your connection to the people around you. How you treat your kin determines your safety, your prosperity, and your place in the world. For the Fore, social bonds are the ultimate form of wealth. The smallest and most fundamental unit of your society is something called the lunai, which means the line. This is your lineage, a group of people who all trace their descent back to a common ancestor through the male line. You are standing on land that belongs to your lunai. It was passed down to your father from his father, and it will one day be passed to your sons. You and your kin in this line live near each other, work together, and support one another. The rules of your society say you must marry someone from outside your own lunai, a practice that constantly weaves different family lines together into a larger social fabric. But here's the thing that makes your culture so resilient. Your kinship system is incredibly flexible. Historians have described it not as a strict vertical family tree, but as a web of attachment based on lateral extension. This is a brilliant adaptation for a people who are mobile and agricultural. It means you aren't just stuck with the family you were born into, you can actively create it. For example, if you need a strong ally in a neighboring hamlet, you can create a formal bond through a ritualized meal. This is called a kagisa relationship. Once you share this meal, that person has all the obligations and responsibilities of a biological brother. You have, in essence, chosen your own family, forging a connection that is just as real as blood. This web of support extends even further. If you are a man, you have a powerful, lifelong bond with your nagaya, or your age mates. These are the other men who were born around the same time as you. Your connection to them is considered as strong as any family tie. You are obligated to help them in hunting, in disputes, and, crucially, in your shared duties when someone in the community dies. Furthermore, adoption is incredibly common. It's a way to strengthen bonds between families and a practical necessity in a world where parents can be lost to illness or accident. All of these practices, the kagisa kin, the nagaya, the adoptions, create an intricate and powerful social safety net. It's a beautiful system of mutual support that ensures no one is left alone. This very web, however, the source of your people's greatest strength, would soon become the perfect pathway for a disease to travel. In your world, the landscape itself is alive. The Fore worldview is deeply animistic. You believe the strange, isolated pools of water, the gnarled and ancient trees, and the swampy ground that glows with fungi at night are all inhabited by powerful bush spirits. These beings are called the Masalai. These places, known as Pleas Masalai, are reservoirs of a magical force, often tied to a specific family lineage. You know to treat these areas with respect, as the spirits within can be mischievous and dangerous. You've grown up with stories of Nakoti, a powerful trickster spirit who can either bestow gifts upon a lucky hunter or inflict terrible illness and death. When you hear the sound of thunder rolling through the valleys, your elders tell you it is the sound of Nakoti throwing away the bones of the dead. Your ancestors are not distant figures from a forgotten past. You believe they are active presences in your daily life. Their spirits can act as your protectors and mediators with the spirit world. Crucially, your people believe that a person has 5 souls, and that the essence and spirit of a person remain within their physical body long after they have passed away. This isn't just a vague spiritual idea, it is a core conviction. This belief, that the body holds the spirit of the deceased, is the philosophical cornerstone for your community's most sacred rituals surrounding death and mourning. It is an expression of profound respect and a way to keep your loved ones close. But there is another force in your spiritual world, one that is immediate and much more frightening. For you and your neighbors, the primary explanation for nearly all serious illness and death is sorcery. This is not an abstract concept, it is a tangible and constant threat. You believe a sorcerer, filled with malice, can harm you from a distance. All they need is your leavings, a scrap of food you didn't finish, a lock of your hair, your discarded fingernail clippings, or even your excrement. You are careful with these things, because a sorcerer can take them and encase them in a bundle of special leaves and magical items. They then place this bundle in a cold, swampy place. As the bundle slowly decays in the damp earth, so too will you sicken and die. This belief system provides a complete and terrifyingly logical explanation for the shaking sickness, Kuru, that you see in your village. When you see a friend or family member begin to tremble, when their speech begins to slur, and they can no longer walk without help, your mind does not go to a natural illness. In a world without germ theory, your culture provides the answer: someone has performed sorcery. This belief is so rampant that it fuels constant fear, distrust, and often spirals into retaliatory violence between families and villages. To the Fore, Kuru is not a medical puzzle to be solved. It is an act of war. The truth, however, was not hidden in a sorcerer's bundle. It was hidden in an act of love. There, we have made first contact, establishing our camp in the highlands of New Guinea and meeting the Fore people. And yet, the most defining moments of this story are still to come. We are marching towards the unsettling echo of the laughing sicknesses through the jungle, and the bitter struggle between Western science and a deep-rooted belief in sorcery that would shape an era. But a word of warning before we delve deeper into this ritual of mourning. The scientific and historical guild that sanctions these anthropological expeditions has certain protocols. Liking this video formally logs your presence with our field team, and subscribing to the channel adds your name to the official research charter. To neglect these duties is to risk being classified as data deficient, lost to the expedition archives, doomed to wander the footnotes of history forever. To avoid such a grim academic fate, I strongly advise you to make your mark. Our journey into the heart of this medical mystery depends on it. Imagine for a moment, you are in the eastern highlands of New Guinea, sometime in the early 1950s. The air around you is thick and humid, heavy with the smell of damp earth, tropical flowers, and the smoke from a nearby cooking fire. You're in your village, a small collection of thatched huts nestled in a clearing, surrounded by a dense and imposing jungle that seems to press in from all sides. The sounds are a constant symphony of buzzing insects and the distant calls of unseen birds. Today, however, a new sound hangs in the air. It's the sound of mourning. A member of your family, someone you love deeply, has died. For you and your people, the Fore, this is a moment of profound sadness, but also of profound responsibility. In your small, tightly knit community, the Western concept of burial feels alien and frankly disrespectful. To place the body of a loved one into the cold, dark earth, to let them be consumed by worms and maggots, seems like an act of abandonment. You believe it's a lonely and horrifying fate. According to the beliefs that have guided your people for generations, there is a much better way. It is a way to keep your loved one close, to honor their life, and to ensure their essence remains a part of the family. This practice, a cornerstone of your culture, is a form of cannibalism. But it's nothing like the violent, savage act you might imagine. For you, it is the ultimate expression of love. Now, this is where things get complicated for outsiders. The practice is known to anthropologists as endocannibalism, which simply means the consumption of one's own relatives or members of one's own community. Some researchers, however, prefer the term transumption. They feel it better captures the true purpose of the ritual, which is the transfer of a person's substance and spirit. In your world, a person's wisdom, their strength, their very spirit, doesn't just vanish upon death. It remains within their physical body, lingering in their flesh and organs. By consuming that body, you and your family can reabsorb those vital qualities. You can literally take their strength into yourself. So, in the moments after a death, you don't see a corpse to be disposed of. You see a vessel still containing the precious life force of someone you cherished. The air in the hut is heavy with grief, the soft sounds of weeping filling the small space. Your skin feels clammy in the tropical heat. You know what must be done. It is a sacred duty, a final act of togetherness. This ritual ensures that the deceased is not truly gone. Instead, their spirit is recycled back into the living, continuing its journey as part of the family. This process, you believe, helps their soul on its path to Quellanandamundi, the land of the dead, by keeping their worldly essence safe within the people who love them most. This distinction is incredibly important. What you are about to do is not exocannibalism, the practice of eating your enemies or outsiders. That is an act of rage, of conquest, of absorbing an enemy's power to dominate them even in death. Your ritual has nothing to do with violence or aggression. Imagine the difference between a funeral and a battle. Both might be loud and intense, but their purpose, their emotional core, could not be more different. For you, this mortuary feast is a communion. It's a final, intimate meal shared with the person you have lost, a way of saying, you will never be forgotten, because you are now a part of us. Welcome to the Feast of Mourning. In the center of your village, preparations are underway. Following a death, a complex and solemn ritual begins, and its roles are strictly defined by tradition. As a woman of the Fore people, this sacred and, as it turns out, dangerous task falls primarily to you and your female relatives. The men of the community rarely take part. Their role in mourning is different, more separate. The responsibility of handling the body, of transforming it from a vessel of grief into an object of remembrance, is yours alone. Your hands, which have tended to children and prepared countless family meals, are now tasked with this final, holy act of care. The process is methodical and carried out with great respect. You and the other women gather around the body of your loved one. The air is still thick with the smell of wood smoke and the humidity of the jungle, but now it's mixed with something more metallic, more visceral. With careful, practiced movements, you begin the task of dismembering the corpse. This is not a scene of frantic violence. It is a slow, deliberate procedure, much like a butcher preparing meat, but imbued with a deep sense of spiritual significance. You separate the muscle from the bone, you carefully remove the internal organs, and you set aside the brain. Each part is treated with reverence, because you believe each part contains a piece of the person's soul. According to your cultural logic, there's a specific reason this duty falls to women. Your traditions teach that a deceased person leaves behind a spiritual pollution, a dangerous essence known as quela. It is believed that women's bodies are inherently better suited to contain and tame this dangerous spirit. By consuming the body, you are not just honoring the dead, you are acting as a spiritual shield for your entire community. You are taking this dangerous quela into yourself, neutralizing it, and thereby protecting the men and the rest of the village from its influence. It is an act of immense communal responsibility, and you feel the weight of it in your bones as you work. Once the body has been prepared, the parts are cooked. You might steam some portions in tubes of bamboo, the heat from the fire warming your face as the scent of cooking flesh fills the air. The sounds of the jungle seem to fade into the background, replaced by the crackling of the fire and the low, somber murmuring of the other women. On the rare occasions that men do participate in the feast, they are only ever allowed to consume the muscle tissue, the flesh. They are kept separate from the more spiritually potent parts of the body. The real work, the true communion, is left to you and the other women, and even the youngest children. It's a devastating detail when you think about it. This gendered division of labour, born from a desire to protect the community, would become the very mechanism of its downfall. What you are doing in this moment is performing the most profound act of love and respect your culture has conceived. You are ensuring the continuity of your family line, absorbing the wisdom of your elders, and protecting your people from spiritual harm. Don't worry, you don't know the terrible secret hidden within this sacred meal. For now, this is simply your duty. It is your way of grieving, your way of remembering, and your way of holding your family together in the face of loss. Now, the feast begins. You gather with your sisters, your aunts, your mother, and your children. The atmosphere is not one of celebration, but of solemn remembrance. Imagine sitting on the earthen floor of a hut, the light from the fire casting long, dancing shadows on the woven walls. The air is warm and smoky. You are handed a portion of the cooked meat. It's warm in your hands, its texture soft. Taking a bite, you are not just satisfying hunger, you are participating in the most intimate act of communion your culture knows. You are literally and metaphorically absorbing your loved one back into the family. The distribution is specific. As the women and children, you are the ones who consume the entire body, the internal organs, the skin, and most critically, the brain. The brain is considered a special delicacy, the most potent vessel of the deceased's spirit and knowledge. A mother might lovingly pass a piece of her own mother's cooked brain to her child. Consider the scene from her point of view. You take a small, soft piece of this sacred meal and give it to your young daughter. In your mind, you are not just giving her food, you are giving her the wisdom of her grandmother. You are giving her strength, courage, and a tangible connection to her ancestors. It is an act of pure, unadulterated love. The human impact of this ritual is almost impossible for an outsider to fully grasp. Imagine the comfort it provides. Instead of the finality of death, you have continuity. Your loved one isn't gone, they live on inside you and your children. Their knowledge isn't lost to the worms, it now informs your own. Their strength doesn't dissipate into the air, it now fortifies your own body. The grief is still there, of course. You can feel it as a hollow ache in your chest, but it's tempered by this powerful sense of connection. The rustle of the thatched roof above you sounds like a whisper, a comforting presence. Somehow, they managed to build an entire philosophy around this. It shaped their understanding of life, death, and family. Every time you participated in one of these feasts, you were reinforcing your place within the community and your connection to the past. The flavors and textures of the meal would become inextricably linked with the person you were mourning. You weren't just remembering them with stories, you were remembering them with all of your senses. This was not a morbid obsession with death, it was a life-affirming commitment to the enduring power of the family unit. Through it all, the central belief remained this was an act of respect. By consuming the flesh of your kin, you were saving them from the indignity of decay. You were providing their body with a living home, a warm vessel rather than a cold grave. The gentle humor of the universe is often dark, and in this case it was exceptionally so. Congratulations, you have just participated in the most sacred ritual of the Fore people. You have honored your dead, strengthened your family, and protected your community. You have also, unknowingly, just ingested a lethal and incurable poison. The truth was, this profound act of love and mourning carried a hidden passenger. Hidden within the brain and nervous system tissues that you so reverently consumed was something no one in your village could have ever imagined. It wasn't a poison in the conventional sense. It wasn't a curse from an angry spirit, nor was it the queller you worked so hard to contain. It was a microscopic, misshapen protein, a biological agent so strange and resilient that it would baffle scientists for decades. And it was the direct cause of the terrifying disease that was silently beginning to spread through your community. This is the devastating irony at the heart of the Fore story. The cultural practice designed to preserve the life force of the community became the very instrument of its destruction. The epidemiological evidence that later emerged was stark and undeniable. Researchers like Shirley Lindenbaum and Robert Glass found that the disease, which the Fore called Kuru, was 8 to 9 times more prevalent among women and children than it was among adult men. For years, the reason was a mystery, but when you understand the ritual of the mortuary feast, the terrible logic becomes crystal clear. The infectious agent, which we now know is a prion, is most highly concentrated in the brain and other nervous system tissues. The men, who rarely participated and only ate muscle, were almost entirely spared. But you, the women and children, who consumed the entire body, especially the brain, were exposing yourselves to the highest possible infectious dose. That loving gesture, a mother sharing a piece of brain with her child, was in reality the delivery of a fatal disease. It was an unwitting death sentence passed down through the most sacred act of remembrance your culture had. Imagine the confusion and terror this must have caused. You perform a ritual that has been passed down for generations, a ritual meant to ensure health and continuity, only to watch your sisters, your mothers, and your children succumb to a horrific, trembling sickness years later. The very fabric of your society was being torn apart by the thing you believed held it together. The source of your spiritual strength had become the source of your physical demise. There was no way for you to know. In a world without microscopes, without an understanding of infectious proteins, what other conclusion could you draw except that it was the result of sorcery or a spiritual failing? In the end, this tragic story is a powerful reminder of how cultural practices and biology can intersect in unforeseen and catastrophic ways. The Fore were not savage or monstrous. They were a people trying to make sense of life and death in the best way they knew how, using a system of logic built on love, respect, and community. They created a beautiful and profound way to process grief. It's just that their beautiful solution happened to contain a fatal flaw, one that was invisible to the naked eye. So next time you think about ancient rituals, remember the Fore. Remember that an act of profound love can, in a world of unseen dangers, have the most devastating consequences imaginable. Imagine for a moment you are in your small Fore village, sometime in the early 1950s. The cool, damp air of the New Guinea highlands hangs heavy, thick with the scent of wood smoke and wet earth. You're sitting outside your hut, mending a net, but your hands don't seem to be working right today. There's a dull ache in your joints, a kind of persistent pain you've been trying to ignore for weeks. You tell yourself it's just the dampness getting into your bones, but then you feel it. It starts in your hands, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor. You try to steady your fingers, but the shaking continues, a tiny rebellion you cannot control. This is how it begins. What you're experiencing is the first whisper of a disease the Fore people call Kuru. The word itself, in your language, means to shiver, or trembling in fear. It's a fitting name. According to researchers who would later study it, this initial phase was often preceded by these vague headaches and limb pains. For you, living through it, it's just a growing sense of unease. The shaking doesn't feel like you're cold, it feels like something deep inside you is coming loose. You try to stand up, and the world seems to tilt. The ground beneath your feet, once so solid and familiar, now feels like the deck of a canoe in rough water. This unsteadiness is what doctors would label as the onset of cerebellar ataxia, a profound loss of coordination. Welcome to the first clinical stage, what scientists called the ambulant stage. You can still walk, but it's becoming a deliberate and clumsy effort. Your gait is unsteady, your balance precarious. You find yourself swaying slightly even when standing still, a condition known as titubation. The muscles in your jaw and tongue feel thick and uncooperative. When you try to speak, the words come out slurred and slow, a frustrating betrayal by your own body. Your family looks at you with a mixture of pity and a new kind of fear. Your children, once so quick to run to you, now watch from a distance, confused by the strange new way you move and talk. The simple act of living has become a challenge. In your community, this isn't seen as a medical problem. There is no concept of a neurological disorder. Instead, there is sorcery. You and your family become convinced that an enemy has performed a ritual, stealing a piece of your hair or a scrap of your food to work a deadly magic against you. This belief adds a thick layer of psychological terror to the physical symptoms. You lie awake at night on your sleeping mat, the rough fibers scratching your skin, listening to the jungle sounds outside. But the real fear isn't in the jungle, it's inside your own hut. You scan the faces of your neighbors, wondering who among them could be the sorcerer, the one responsible for this creeping sickness that is slowly stealing your control. The human impact is devastating, turning a personal tragedy into a community-wide web of suspicion and dread. As the weeks turn into a month, your condition worsens. You need a walking stick to get to the sweet potato garden, its wooden handle feeling both foreign and essential in your trembling hand. The path you've walked 1,000 times is now a treacherous obstacle course. Your friends and family try to help, offering you support, but their touch only seems to highlight your own weakness. The simple pride you once took in your strength and competence has evaporated, replaced by a constant humming anxiety. You are still you. Your mind is still clear, but you are becoming a prisoner in a body that refuses to obey your commands. The shaking, once a subtle tremor, is now a constant, visible part of who you are. Now, you can no longer walk at all without someone holding you up. You have entered what researchers would call the second, or sedentary stage. You spend most of your days sitting on the earthen floor of your hut, the cool dirt a constant reminder of your immobility. The tremors that started in your hands have now spread through your entire body, shaking you with a relentless, exhausting rhythm. Sometimes your limbs will suddenly jerk and flail without any warning, a phenomenon called myoclonus. You might knock over a water gourd or accidentally strike someone sitting beside you, adding embarrassment to your list of daily struggles. Your world has shrunk to the few feet of space you occupy on the floor. It's in this stage that the most terrifying and misunderstood symptom appears. One afternoon, while your family is quietly speaking, a strange feeling overtakes your facial muscles. They pull back into a tight, grotesque grin. A sound erupts from your throat, a sharp, barking noise that sounds horribly like a laugh. But you aren't happy, you are terrified. This is the infamous lawing sickness. It isn't joy. Scientists would later identify it as a rhizus sardonicus, a pathological spasm of the facial muscles. You have no control over it. These bursts of morbid laughter can happen at any time, an outward sign of mirth that masks a complete and horrifying internal chaos. The sound of your own laughter becomes the sound of your disease. Your family doesn't know what to make of it. How can you be laughing when you are so clearly suffering? The belief in sorcery deepens. The curse must be incredibly powerful to produce such a bizarre effect. Your children are now scared of you. The sound of your uncontrollable laughter sends them running from the hut, their small faces etched with fear. This emotional lability, as it was clinically termed, isolates you completely. You might cry one moment and laugh the next, your emotional state completely disconnected from your actions. You feel like a ghost haunting your own life, watching your body perform these strange and alien rituals while you are trapped powerlessly inside. The human impact of this stage is one of total dependence. You cannot feed yourself. Your hands shake too violently to hold a piece of roasted yam. A family member, perhaps your husband or an older child, must patiently put food into your mouth for you. The slurring of your speech has worsened to the point where you can barely form intelligible words. Communication is reduced to grunts and gestures. You are acutely aware of the burden you've become. The scent of cooking food, once a comfort, now brings a sense of dread, as the simple act of eating becomes a slow and difficult chore. You are still conscious, still aware, but your ability to interact with the world is slipping away, moment by agonizing moment. The days blur into a monotonous cycle of sitting, shaking, and being cared for. You watch the life of the village continue outside the dark doorway of your hut. You hear the sounds of children playing, the rhythmic thud of women beating pandanus leaves, the calls of men returning from a hunt. These are the sounds of a life you no longer have. You are a spectator to your own existence. The lawing sickness is perhaps the cruelest part. It's a mask of happiness forced upon a face of utter despair, a final, tragic irony in a disease defined by a loss of control. It's a public performance of an intensely private horror, further convincing your community that this is no ordinary illness, but the work of a powerful and malevolent spirit. Welcome to the final stage of Kuru. There is no more sitting up. You are now completely bedridden, lying on a mat of leaves and bark inside your hut. The air is still and heavy, carrying the faint, sweet smell of decaying thatch from the roof above. You have entered the terminal stage. Your body, once merely uncooperative, is now a rigid prison. You are often fixed in a strange, dystonic posture, your limbs locked in place. The tremors and violent jerks have mostly subsided, replaced by a profound stillness. You can no longer move. You can no longer speak. You are trapped. One of the most tragic details noted by researchers like Vincent Zygas and Carlton Gajusek was that in this state, you are often still conscious. Your mind is still aware, but your ability to communicate with the outside world is gone. You can hear your family members whispering nearby. You can feel the warmth of the morning sun as it filters through the cracks in the hut's walls. You can smell the smoke from the cooking fire, but you cannot respond. You cannot signal your fear, your sadness, or your love. You are an observer, locked inside a silent, unresponsive body, waiting for an end you know is inevitable. It's a state of unimaginable isolation. The final challenge is swallowing. The neurological damage has now reached the point where you suffer from severe dysphagia, the inability to swallow. Your family tries to give you water and thin gruel, but your throat will not work. The liquid dribbles from your mouth, or worse, goes down the wrong way, sending you into a fit of silent, choking coughs. Because of this, as doctors later determined, death rarely came from the direct neurological damage of Kuru itself. Instead, it was the secondary complications that were fatal. You are, in effect, slowly dying of starvation and dehydration, or from aspiration pneumonia, as bits of food or fluid find their way into your lungs, causing a fatal infection. Looking beyond your personal tragedy, the scale of this epidemic was staggering for the Fore people. By the time it was being documented in the 1950s, Kuru had reached terrifying proportions. Evidence suggests the disease likely started from a single, spontaneous case of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in a person living near the village of Uwami sometime around the turn of the 20th century. Through the practice of mortuary cannibalism, this single tragic case began to spread. The disease moved slowly at first, a creeping horror passed from feast to feast, from one generation to the next. For decades it was a dark rumor, a mysterious wasting sickness that plagued certain families. By the mid-1950s that rumor had become a full-blown catastrophe. At its peak, Kuru was killing up to 200 people every single year. For a small, isolated population like the Fore, these numbers were devastating. This represented an annual death rate of up to 2% of the entire society. Imagine if 2% of your country's population died from a single disease every year. It would be a national crisis of unimaginable proportions. For the Fore, it was a quiet, creeping apocalypse that was not just killing individuals, but hollowing out the very heart of their communities, one shaking body at a time. The end for you comes quietly, not with a bang, but with a final, gentle fading away. The social fabric of Fore society began to unravel under the immense pressure of the Kuru epidemic. The catastrophe wasn't random, it was highly specific. And the reason for that specificity lay in the mortuary feasts you learned about earlier. Because women and children were the primary participants in these rituals of mourning, they were the ones who consumed the infected tissues. Therefore, they were the primary victims of the disease. Men, who rarely participated in this part of the feast, were largely spared. This created a biological and social disaster with a terrifyingly unique signature. It was a disease that targeted mothers, daughters, and sisters. In village after village in the South Fore region, the adult female population was almost completely erased. Imagine walking into a community and seeing men, old and young, and small children, but almost no women of childbearing age. This was the reality in the hardest hit areas. Researchers documented a catastrophic gender imbalance. The normal 1-to-1 ratio of men to women became dangerously skewed, in some villages reaching 1 man for every 2 women, and in the most extreme cases a shocking 1-to-3 ratio. The demographic collapse was swift and brutal, creating entire communities of bachelors and widowers. This crisis forced a radical change in the Fore way of life. With so few women, many men were left without wives, unable to form new families. Children were left without mothers to care for them. This necessitated a complete restructuring of traditional family roles. You would see fathers and uncles taking on tasks that had always been considered women's work. Men learned to tend the gardens, prepare the food, and raise the infants. In a society with strictly defined gender roles, this was a monumental shift, born of pure necessity. Through it all, they managed, they adapted. The community, though horrifically scarred, found a way to carry on. The combination of factors created a perfect storm of social terror. You had a disease that was 100% fatal, with no survivors and no cure. You had a disease with an incredibly long and unpredictable incubation period. You could be perfectly healthy for years, even decades, before the first tremor appeared. And you had a belief system that didn't blame a germ but blamed your neighbor. This meant that every single death from Kuru reignited the cycle of suspicion, fear, and accusations of sorcery. It wasn't just a public health crisis, it was a crisis of faith and community, threatening to tear the Fore apart from the inside. So next time you hear about a mysterious disease, think of the Fore. Their experience was more than a medical curiosity. It was a human tragedy on a massive scale, one that played out in the quiet, smoky huts of the New Guinea highlands. It was a story of a people confronted by an enemy they couldn't see, an enemy that wore the face of their loved ones and spoke with a horrifying, pathological laugh. But it was also a story of resilience, of a society that, when faced with an existential threat that seemed to target its very future, somehow found a way to endure. In the end, the shaking sickness did more than just kill individuals, it threatened to unravel an entire culture. And picture this. The year is 1951. You've just arrived at the newly established Okapa patrol post in the Eastern Highlands of New Guinea. As an Australian colonial officer, or KIAP, your job is to extend the government's influence into this remote, mountainous terrain. The air here is thick, a constant cocktail of damp earth, sweet-smelling tropical flowers, and the ever-present aroma of wood smoke from countless small villages tucked into the hillsides. You feel a persistent humidity that clings to your skin and clothes, a stark contrast to the world you left behind. For the local Fore people, your presence is a curiosity for you. Their world is an overwhelming puzzle, and you're about to encounter its most tragic piece. Your name is John MacArthur, and in your patrols through the dense, muddy landscape, you begin to hear stories. You see the evidence with your own eyes. It's a strange shaking sickness, a trembling that starts subtly and ends in complete incapacitation and death. In the cool air of a village clearing, you watch a woman struggle to walk, her body betraying her with uncontrollable shivers. The Fore people have a name for it, a word they whisper with a mixture of fear and resignation, Kuru. They tell you it is the work of sorcery, a curse placed upon a victim. Looking at the sufferers, with no visible wounds or fever, you can't find a better explanation. To your Western mind, it seems to defy medicine. According to your reports, you conclude it must surely be psychological, a sad, fatalistic belief made real. Now, let's fast forward to 1957. The situation has only worsened. Kuru is not a passing hysteria, it's an epidemic at its absolute peak. Imagine you are Dr. Vincent Zigas, a district medical officer. You've been working here for a few years, documenting the horror, but you are overwhelmed. Your small clinic smells of antiseptic and damp canvas, a futile attempt to impose order on a world teeming with invisible threats. You've been sending reports, trying to alert the wider scientific community, and today, help arrives. He is Dr. Carleton Gadjusek, a brilliant and fiercely ambitious American researcher. When you meet him, you sense an intense, restless energy, a mind eager to conquer this baffling plague. His arrival marks the beginning of a formal, relentless investigation into the heart of the mystery. For the Fore, it just means more strange men asking questions and taking samples, a new chapter in a long and bewildering story. Together, you and Gadjusek begin the arduous process of untangling the web of Kuru. You spend your days trekking from village to village, the squelch of mud under your boots a constant rhythm. In the evenings, you sit in a cramped tent or a basic hut, the air buzzing with insects attracted to your kerosene lamp. You're performing autopsies under the most primitive conditions, trying to find a clue inside the bodies of the victims. You feel the immense weight of the task. The Fore communities are being hollowed out, particularly their women and children. Every new death is a personal failure, a stark reminder that you are fighting an enemy you cannot see, name, or understand. The pressure is immense, and the answers are buried somewhere in the traditions and tragedies of the people you're here to help. The first and most obvious avenues of investigation lead you nowhere. Don't worry, this is how science often works, by patiently crossing things off a list. You suspect it might be something in the environment, so you test the water from the streams, clouded with silt from the constant rain. You test the soil in the gardens where the Fore grow their sweet potatoes and yams. You analyze the food itself, looking for a plant-based toxin or a nutritional deficiency that could explain the neurological decay. The texture of the yams, the smell of the greens cooking over a fire, it all seems perfectly normal. Every test comes back negative. There is no poison in the water, no strange element in the ground. The people are not starving. This wasn't going to be an easy answer. With environmental factors ruled out, your focus shifts. Perhaps it's a conventional infection. You are, after all, in a place where bacteria and viruses thrive. You take blood samples, carefully labeling each one. The scent of alcohol wipes a brief, sharp interruption to the earthy air. You search for known pathogens, for any sign of encephalitis or a similar disease that could attack the nervous system. Yet, once again, the results are confounding. The victims of Kuru show no fever, no inflammation, none of the classic signs of infection that your medical training taught you to look for. It's a ghost in the machine, an illness that leaves no fingerprints. For the people suffering, this scientific process offered little comfort. Their loved ones were still dying, and these outsiders, with all their equipment, seemed just as baffled as they were. In the late 1950s, you're now working primarily with Dr. Gardusek, and you've settled on what seems like the most plausible theory: genetics. After all, if it's not the environment, and it's not a typical infection, what else could it be? You spend your days documenting family trees, sitting in the smoky dimness of Fore huts. The sounds of village life, children playing, pigs snuffling in the dirt, are the backdrop to your meticulous work. You ask questions, with a translator's help, about who was related to whom, and a clear pattern emerges. Kuru runs in families. If a mother had it, her children often developed it. It seemed to pass down through generations, a grim inheritance. This felt like a solid lead, a hereditary disorder locked into the Fore gene pool. This genetic hypothesis becomes the dominant theory for years. It makes a certain kind of sense, explaining the clusters of cases without needing an external cause. You might feel a sense of relief, as if you've finally put a name to the monster. You can almost see the flawed gene being passed from parent to child, a tragic but understandable biological mechanism. The human impact of this theory was significant. It framed the Fore as victims of their own biology, a people with a unique, fatal flaw. But it was also a dead end. It didn't explain why the disease had only appeared a few decades earlier, nor could it suggest any kind of cure. It was an answer that provided no hope. But here's the thing about scientific truth: it doesn't care about your preferred hypothesis. In 1961, two new people arrive in the forelands. They aren't medical doctors, they are cultural anthropologists Shirley Lindenbaum and her husband Robert Glass. Your first impression might be that they're here for a different purpose, to study customs and kinship. Their initial goal was actually to collect the genealogical data needed to test your genetic theory. They immerse themselves in the community in a way that you, as a medical investigator, haven't. They live among the Fore, learning the subtle rhythms of their language and the intricate details of their social lives. The air they breathe is the same, filled with the smell of cooking fires and damp vegetation, but their focus is different. They are mapping connections, not just bloodlines. What they found would change everything. As you sit with Lindenbaum, watching her meticulously draw complex kinship charts, you realize she's tracking more than just genetics. She's tracking relationships. She asks who attended which funerals, who took part in the mortuary feasts, who, specifically, consumed the body of the deceased as a final act of love and mourning. The details are recorded with quiet, academic precision, and when the data is all laid out, the pattern is not one of genes, but of ritual. Kuru, her research powerfully suggested, didn't spread through bloodlines. It spread through the act of endocannibalism. The people who got sick were the ones who had eaten the brains of their dead relatives. For the Fore women and children, who were the primary participants in these feasts, this cultural practice had become a death sentence. Lindenbaum and Glass's findings provided the first strong evidence linking the mortuary feasts to the spread of Kuru. It was a stunning breakthrough, a moment where cultural understanding unlocked a medical mystery. You'd think the scientific community would be overjoyed, but the truth was, the reception was skeptical. According to historical records, even Gardusek himself was reluctant to accept it. He was a virologist at heart, still hunting for a physical pathogen. The idea that the answer lay in anthropology, in understanding the social fabric of Fore life, was a difficult pill to swallow. Imagine the frustration for Lindenbaum, having uncovered the terrible truth only to have it met with doubt. It showed that sometimes the biggest barriers to discovery aren't in nature, but in our own preconceptions. Somehow they manage to press on. Lindenbaum's argument was just too compelling to ignore forever. Her data showed that Kuru spread along the pathways of social obligation, not genetic inheritance. A woman might get Kuru, and then her sister-in-law who attended the funeral feast would get it, even if they weren't blood relatives. This was the piece of the puzzle that the genetic model could never explain. It was a classic case of needing to understand the culture to understand the disease. So next time you hear about a complex problem, you might remember that the answer can come from a completely unexpected field of study. For the Fore, the slow cessation of the feasts, under pressure from Australian authorities, was already underway. Unbeknownst to them, they were closing the door on the very thing that was killing them. Now, let's leave the humid, rain-soaked mountains of New Guinea behind. Travel with me across the world. Welcome to London in 1959. The air here is different, it's cool and damp. carrying the scent of coal smoke and wet pavement. You are Dr. William Hadlow, an American veterinary pathologist. You have no connection to the Fore people. You've likely never even heard the word Kuru. Your world is one of livestock diseases. You spend your days looking through microscopes at the tissue of sheep, specifically sheep who have died from a strange neurological disease called scrapie. It's a niche field, but you are an expert in it. One afternoon, you find yourself wandering through a scientific exhibit at the Wellcome Medical Museum. The gallery is quiet, the lighting subdued. Your footsteps echo softly on the polished floor. Your browse displays of medical curiosities from around the world when something catches your eye. It's a small display about a mysterious shaking sickness in a remote tribe in New Guinea. There are photographs, and what you see stops you in your tracks. They are images of magnified brain tissue from a person who died of Kuru. You lean in closer, feeling a strange sense of familiarity. The texture you see in the photo, the pattern of damage, it is astonishingly familiar. What you're looking at is a brain riddled with tiny holes, giving it a distinct, spongy appearance. Your mind immediately connects this to your own work. In your lab, you've seen this exact same pathology countless times. This spongy degeneration, these specific vacuoles in the neurons, are the telltale sign of scrapie in sheep. The similarity is not just vague according to your later account, it was virtually identical. A strange human disease from the other side of the planet looked exactly like an obscure animal disease from Europe. It was a moment of pure scientific serendipity, a connection that no one else could have possibly made. This single observation would become the intellectual catalyst for solving the entire mystery. You feel a sense of professional duty. This connection is too important to keep to yourself. Back in your office, the air smelling of old paper and books, you sit down to compose a letter. You write to the Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. You carefully lay out your observation, pointing out the striking neuropathological similarities between Kuru and scrapie. But you don't stop there. You include the most crucial piece of information: scrapie was known to be a transmissible disease. And most importantly, it had a very, very long incubation period, sometimes taking years to manifest. You suggest very clearly that Kuru might also be an infectious disease with a similar slow fuse. Your letter is published. For most of the world, it's just another short correspondence in a dense medical journal. But for a certain Dr. Gadusek, it's a thunderbolt. Hadlow's letter provides the logical leap that had been missing. It reframes the entire problem. Kuru might not be genetic or toxicological, it might be an infection, but an infection of a type that no one was familiar with, one that could lie dormant for years, or even decades. The human impact of this single letter was immense. It gave Gadusek a clear, testable hypothesis and a concrete experimental path forward. The answer wasn't just in anthropology, it was also in veterinary science. Through it all, the pieces were finally falling into place. Lindenbaum's anthropological work suggested how the disease was spreading through the consumption of infected tissue. Now, Hadlow's veterinary insight suggested what was spreading: a transmissible agent with a long incubation period, similar to the one that caused scrapie. You can almost feel the disparate threads of the investigation beginning to weave together into a single coherent tapestry. It's a beautiful example of how progress isn't a straight line. It's a messy, collaborative process that relies on insights from unexpected places. For the scientists, the hunt was on again, but this time they knew what they were looking for, or at least they knew how to prove it existed. The scene shifts once more. We leave the dusty libraries of London and travel to the sterile, climate-controlled laboratories of the National Institutes of Health in the United States. The year is now 1963. You are with Dr. Gajusek's team. The air here doesn't smell of rain or smoke, it smells of disinfectant and filtered air. Gone are the makeshift clinics and muddy trails. Here, you are surrounded by gleaming steel, advanced equipment, and the quiet hum of scientific machinery. Spurred on by Hadlow's letter and Lindenbaum's persistent anthropological evidence, Gajusek is about to embark on the landmark experiment that will define his career. The procedure itself is somber and methodical. You watch as the researchers carefully prepare their samples. The source material is brain tissue, obtained during an autopsy of a young Fore girl named Kigia, who had tragically died of Kuru. The tissue is homogenized into a slurry, a grim but necessary step. The goal is to prove transmissibility, and for that, you need a test subject that is as close to human as possible. Your eyes turn to the animal enclosures. There you see the chimpanzees. They are the chosen subjects for this long and patient experiment. You watch as they are inoculated with the infected human brain tissue. Then the waiting begins. For months, nothing happens. A year passes. The chimps appear perfectly healthy, playing and eating in their enclosures. The daily routine of the lab continues. You help with observations, checking the animals for any sign, any subtle tremor or loss of coordination. Doubt begins to creep in. Maybe the theory was wrong. Maybe Kuru was not transmissible after all. The air in the lab feels heavy with anticipation and the growing possibility of failure. It takes an incredible amount of patience to conduct this kind of slow science, where your hypothesis might take years to prove or disprove. For the researchers, it was a long, quiet vigil. Then, nearly 2 years after the initial inoculation, it happens. One of the chimpanzees, a female named Daisy, begins to show the first, unmistakable signs. It starts as a slight tremor in her hand. Soon she has trouble balancing, her movements becoming clumsy and uncertain. Over the next few months, you witness the full, tragic progression of the disease. The ataxia, the loss of motor control, the vacant stare, it is a chilling echo of what you saw in the villages of New Guinea. There is no longer any doubt. The disease has been transmitted. The breakthrough, when it finally comes, is both a moment of profound scientific victory and deep sadness. The final proof comes from the autopsy. When the chimpanzees that develop the sickness eventually die, their brains are examined under a microscope. The images confirm what everyone suspects. Their brain tissue is riddled with the same spongy holes, the same spongiform encephalopathy that defined Kuru in humans and scrapie in sheep. The chain of evidence is now complete and unbreakable. The results, published in 1966, were definitive proof that Kuru was an infectious disease caused by a transmissible agent. It was a paradigm-shifting discovery. Gaddusek and his team had proven that a chronic, degenerative disease of the brain could be infectious. For this work, he would be awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1976. In the end, the central mystery of how Kuru spread was solved. It wasn't a genetic curse or a form of sorcery. It was an infectious agent, passed from person to person through a ritual of love and grief. Gaddusek, lacking a better term for this bizarre pathogen, called it a slow, unconventional virus. It was slow because of its incredibly long incubation period. It was unconventional because it provoked no immune response and was invisible to even the most powerful microscopes of the day. The how was answered, but a deeper question remained. What exactly was this invisible agent of death? The world now knew about slow infections, but the nature of the pathogen itself remained a profound and unsettling enigma. Don't worry, that answer is coming. In the late 1960s, deep within sterile laboratories worlds away from New Guinea, you find yourself staring at a profound biological puzzle. The hum of refrigeration units is a constant companion, and the air carries the sharp, clean scent of disinfectant. The slow virus theory, proposed by Carlton Gaddusek, was a good start, but for the scientists working on it, the pieces just weren't fitting together. The agent causing Kuru was behaving in ways that no virus should. For the researchers, this wasn't just an academic problem, it was a maddening contradiction that defied the fundamental rules of life they had built their careers on. Let's say your task is to destroy this infectious particle. You are a scientist in a white lab coat, meticulously preparing samples. First, you try boiling them. You subject the samples to temperatures that would tear any normal virus or bacteria to shreds. But when you test it, the agent is still there, still infectious. The water boils and steams, but the invisible enemy within it remains untouched. This strange resilience was deeply unsettling for those who encountered it, a ghost in the biological machine. Now, let's step into the scene as you escalate your methods. You decide to use a more powerful weapon, formaldehyde. You soak the infected brain tissue in this potent chemical, the same substance used to preserve bodies, a substance famous for its ability to halt all biological processes. The acrid smell stings your nostrils even through your protective mask. Surely this would be the end of it. And yet, after all that, the agent remains active. It's as if you're trying to kill something that was never truly alive to begin with. The researchers must have felt a growing sense of unease, facing a foe that broke all the established rules of engagement. The final attempts were even more desperate. According to reports from the time, scientists subjected the infectious material to intense radiation, enough to shatter the genetic core of any known organism. You can almost hear the buzz of the equipment as it bombards the sample with energy, yet the result is the same. The Kuru agent survives. This led to a conclusion that seemed, at the time, completely impossible. For an agent to replicate and spread, it needed a blueprint. It needed DNA or RNA. It's the central dogma of biology, the foundation you learned in your first-year textbooks. But exhaustive searches turned up nothing. No genetic material could be found. For the people studying it, this was like discovering a book with no words that could still tell a story. This is where our story takes another turn. In the 1970s, a young and ambitious American neurologist named Stanley Prisner enters the scene. He had followed the Kuru story and the related mystery of a sheep disease called scrapie with intense curiosity. He wasn't satisfied with the slow virus explanation. He saw the contradictions not as a dead end, but as a challenge. You can almost see him in his lab, surrounded by notes and data, feeling that tingling intuition that he was on the verge of something enormous. He decided to dedicate his career to isolating and identifying this phantom menace, a decision that would ultimately lead him down a path of scientific heresy. For years, Prisner and his team worked tirelessly. The long nights, the failed experiments, the slow, methodical process of elimination were all part of the process. They were trying to purify the infectious agent, to get a clean sample of it, something that proved incredibly difficult. The work was painstaking and the invisible enemy was elusive. But as his experiments repeatedly confirmed that the agent had no nucleic acids, he started to build a radical new hypothesis. He was beginning to believe the unthinkable that a simple protein, all by itself, could be infectious. This idea was so contrary to established biology that even thinking it felt like a risk. In 1982, Stanley Prisner was finally ready to share his revolutionary idea with the world. Let's put you in the shoes of an editor at a prestigious science journal as his paper lands on your desk. As you read it, you feel a mix of astonishment and deep skepticism. He proposed that the agent wasn't a virus, or a bacterium, or any life form at all. He argued it was composed solely of protein. To describe this entirely new class of pathogen, he coined a new word. He combined the words proteinaceous and infectious to create the term prion. It was a simple, elegant name for a concept that threatened to upend decades of biological certainty. The reaction from the scientific community was not one of celebration. Let's transport you to a major scientific conference in the early 1980s. You're sitting in a large, crowded auditorium. Prisner is at the podium, calmly explaining his findings. But as he speaks, you can feel the mood in the room shift. There are whispers, shaking heads, and outright scoffs. The air grows thick with disbelief, and according to historical accounts, even hostility. For the established experts in the field, who had spent their lives studying viruses, this was pure heresy. It was a challenge to the very foundation of their work, and they did not take it lightly. For the next decade, Prisner faced a constant uphill battle. Your own career as a scientist depends on funding, publications, and the respect of your peers. Prisner found all of these in short supply. He was ridiculed, his funding was threatened, and many of his colleagues dismissed his work outright. It was a lonely and difficult period. You have to appreciate the immense self-belief it took to continue your work when the entire world of science is telling you that you are wrong. He was an outsider, pushing an idea that nobody wanted to believe. But through it all, he persevered, driven by the evidence his own experiments kept providing. Don't worry, his dedication would eventually be rewarded. What Prisner was proposing was a completely new principle of infection. Before him, you had two main culprits for infectious disease. You had living organisms like bacteria and fungi, and you had viruses which hijack a cell's machinery using their own DNA or RNA. Prisner was suggesting a third way, a way that involved no genetics, no reproduction in the traditional sense, but something much stranger. He was saying that a protein, a simple molecule, could become a pathogen and spread like wildfire through the brain. This concept was the key that would finally unlock the mystery of Kuru. So, what exactly was this terrifying and elegant mechanism he had uncovered? The truth was more like a zombie movie than traditional microbiology. It involved a single protein, one that already exists inside every one of us, going rogue. To understand this, think of a perfectly normal, functional part of your own body suddenly becoming a corrupting influence, a tiny traitor that turns its neighbors into copies of its own twisted self. This was the dark secret behind the laughing sickness, a secret hidden not in a virus, but in the shape of a protein. The key to understanding Prison's discovery lies in the world of protein folding. Think of a protein as a long string of beads that has to be folded into a very specific, intricate 3D shape to do its job. Your body is filled with trillions of these molecular machines, each folded perfectly. But what if one of them were to fold into the wrong shape? What if that wrong shape had the power to make others fold the wrong way too? This is precisely what Prisoner discovered was happening, a subtle error in geometry with devastating consequences. Let's get a closer look at this process. In your brain, on the surface of your neurons, you have countless copies of a normal, harmless protein. Scientists now call it PrPC, which stands for cellular prion protein. Its exact job isn't fully understood, but it's a standard part of your healthy cellular machinery. It has a specific, stable shape that allows it to perform its duties without causing any trouble. It's a helpful and reliable citizen in the bustling metropolis of your brain. Now, let's consider a corrupted version of this same exact protein. It has the same sequence of amino acids, the same string of beads, but it has been misfolded into a different, toxic 3D shape. This is the prion, the infectious agent. Scientists call this form prepes, with the CS standing for scrapie, the sheep disease where it was first studied in depth. This prepes C version is incredibly stable, almost like a little crystal. And it has one terrifying property: it's a bad influence. Here's how you can visualize the chain reaction beginning. One of these malevolent prepes prions bumps into a healthy, normal pre-PC protein inside your brain. The encounter is transformative. The infectious prion acts like a template, forcing the healthy protein to abandon its normal shape and refold into the dangerous, toxic prepes conformation. The gentle touch of the corrupted protein is enough to convert the healthy one. It's a silent, molecular conversion that sets off an unstoppable cascade. This process is devastatingly effective. Each new prepes C molecule that is created can then go on to find another healthy pre-PC protein and convert it. You can see how this creates an exponential chain reaction. 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8, and so on. A single, initial misfolded protein can trigger a slow but relentless wave of corruption that spreads through the brain's protein population. For the person affected, this silent, creeping takeover is happening on a microscopic level, with no symptoms for years or even decades. So what happens to all of these misfolded proteins? Unlike your normal proteins, which are regularly cleaned up and recycled by your cells, the pre-PSC form is incredibly resistant to this disposal system. They are tough and durable. Because of their sticky, abnormal shape, they begin to clump together. These clumps form long, tough fibrils and dense plaques, known as amyloid plaques. You can think of it like gunk building up in the delicate plumbing of your brain, clogging the system and poisoning the cells around it. The result of this protein pileup is the death of neurons. As the essential brain cells die off, they leave behind microscopic empty spaces or vacuoles. Now, take a look with us through a microscope at a slice of brain tissue from someone who had Kuru. Instead of a dense, healthy network of cells, you see something different. The tissue is riddled with tiny holes. The texture looks eerily like a sponge. This characteristic appearance is what gives this entire family of diseases its scientific name, transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. It's a literal description of what the disease does. It transmits, it makes the brain spongy, and it destroys the mind. For the Fore people, this microscopic change manifested as the uncontrollable shaking, the dementia, and the terrifying empty laughter of Kuru. With the discovery of the prion, the puzzle pieces finally clicked into place. Scientists realized that Kuru was not an isolated phenomenon. It was just one member of a whole family of fatal diseases affecting both humans and animals, all caused by the same fundamental mechanism. Let's say you're a biologist, and for decades you've been studying a dozen different, mysterious illnesses. Suddenly, one discovery provides a single, unifying theory that explains all of them. It was a watershed moment in medicine and biology. Let's look at the other members of this grim family. You have scrapie, the disease in sheep and goats that had been documented for centuries. Farmers noticed their animals would obsessively scrape their bodies against fences until their wool was rubbed off, hence the name. They also developed the same telltale ataxia, the loss of coordination, that was seen in Kuru patients. Then there was bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE, which you probably know by its more common name, mad cow disease. In the 1980s and 90s, this disease caused aggression and staggering in cattle, creating a major public health crisis. All of them, it turned out, were prion diseases. And then there was the human equivalent, a rare but horrific condition called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or CJD. For years, it was just a mysterious and rapidly progressing dementia. Now, scientists understood it was also a spongiform encephalopathy. This new understanding revealed something else, that was crucial. Prion diseases could arise in three very different ways. The first way is acquired, which is what you see with Kuru. The Fore people acquired it from an external source by consuming the prion-infected brains of their relatives. This is also how humans contracted a new version of CJD, called variant CJD, from eating beef contaminated with BSE from mad cows. The second pathway is sporadic. This is actually the most common way for CJD to occur, accounting for about 85% of cases. In sporadic CJD, there's no external source and no genetic predisposition. It's simply a case of cosmic bad luck. Deep within your brain, one of your trillions of normal PerPC proteins spontaneously misfolds into the dangerous PerPSC form for no apparent reason. That one random event is enough to kickstart the deadly chain reaction. For the person affected, it's a fatal lottery, a spontaneous error in their own biology. The final pathway is familial, or hereditary. In these cases, an individual inherits a faulty gene. This mutation in the gene that codes for the prion protein makes the resulting protein inherently unstable. It's like manufacturing a machine with a tiny flaw that makes it far more likely to break down. People with these mutations have a much higher chance of one of their prion proteins spontaneously misfolding during their lifetime, leading to inherited forms of CJD or other prion diseases like fatal familial insomnia. This explained why these conditions seem to run so strongly in certain families. For his discovery of this entirely new biological principle of infection, Stanley Prisner was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1997. After years of ridicule and skepticism, his perseverance was vindicated in the most profound way. It was a testament to his courage in challenging the central dogma of his field. In the end, the long, winding investigation that started with a strange laughing sickness in a remote mountain tribe had completely rewritten a fundamental chapter in the Book of Life. It showed us that a single, misfolded protein could be just as deadly as the most fearsome virus. For generations, your world has been defined by a creeping dread. It has been a constant, unwelcome guest in your village, a shadow that falls over every family. The shaking sickness, Kuru, has stolen your mothers, your sisters, and your children. But now, in the late 1950s, something is changing. The air in the eastern highlands of New Guinea feels different, carrying with it new sounds and new ideas. You see outsiders more frequently now. They are Australian colonial authorities and Christian missionaries, and they bring with them a stark, difficult message. Imagine sitting in the cool, damp earth of your village clearing, the familiar scent of wood smoke and wet soil hanging in the air. You listen as these new people, through translators, speak of the shaking sickness. They tell your elders that the source of the plague is not a sorcerer's curse, but something tied to your most sacred traditions. They speak of the mortuary feasts, the act of consuming loved ones to keep their spirit within the community. According to them, this act of love is the very thing that is killing you. The practice, they insist, must stop. For you and your people, this is a profound challenge to your understanding of grief, family, and the afterlife. The decision is a heavy one, but the evidence is hard to ignore. Kuru overwhelmingly affects women and children, the primary participants in the funeral rituals. So, with a sense of collective, weary resignation, the Fore people agree. Throughout the late 1950s and into the early 1960s, a tradition that has defined your culture for generations is abandoned. You no longer partake in endocannibalism. The primary chain of transmission for the terrifying disease is finally broken. A quiet, uncertain hope begins to settle over your community. You watch your children play, and for the first time, you don't have to carry the constant fear that this sickness will inevitably claim them. But here's the thing about a disease like Kuru. Ending the practice that spreads it is like shutting off a faucet, but the floor is already flooded, and the water is seeping slowly through the floorboards. The prion that causes Kuru is patient. It can hide inside a person's body, silent and dormant, for an incredibly long time. Scientists would later discover that its incubation period is one of the longest known to medicine. You could be infected as a small child, running barefoot through the village, and not show a single sign of illness until you are a grandparent. It was a ghost that would haunt your people for decades to come. In the years immediately following the ban, the change is palpable. The constant hum of mourning begins to quiet down. The central dance ground is no longer so frequently occupied by the heartbreaking spectacle of a loved one's final, trembling days. You might even allow yourself to believe the nightmare is truly over. Life takes on a new rhythm, one not dictated by the constant threat of the shaking sickness. You watch your family grow, and the old terror fades into a painful memory. The air feels lighter, cleaner. The daily sounds of village life, the laughter of children, the chopping of wood, the calls of birds in the dense canopy are no longer underscored by an ever-present note of sorrow. But then, years later, perhaps in the 1970s it happens. A woman in a neighbouring village, someone you knew from your youth, begins to stumble. Her hands start to tremble. You hear the whispers return, the same ones you heard so often in your childhood. The familiar, chilling progression of symptoms begins all over again. The sickness wasn't gone, it was just waiting. This is the long, tragic tale of the epidemic. It's a slow, painful echo of a past you thought you had left behind. For the Fore people, peace would be a very long time coming. The seeds of the disease had been sown decades earlier, and the harvest of sorrow was not yet complete. You have to learn to live with a new kind of dread, not the fear of the present, but the ghost of the past. It's now 1980. You are middle-aged, and your own children are having children. The world has changed immensely. Your village has seen more of the outside world, yet the core of your life remains rooted in the highland soil. The scent of cooking sweet potatoes still fills the evening air. The chill of the mountain nights still makes you pull your blanket a little tighter. For the most part, the terror of Kuru feels like a story you tell the younger generation, a dark legend from a bygone era. They listen with wide eyes, struggling to imagine a time when almost every family was actively losing someone to the shaking death. And yet, the legend is not quite a legend. Every so often, the news arrives from a nearby hamlet. An elderly person, someone in their 50s or 60s, has started to show the signs. The tremors, the slurred speech, the eventual loss of coordination. Everyone knows what it is. Kuru. The victim is someone who attended mortuary feasts as a child, long before the ban. They were infected in the 1950s and carried the misfolded protein silently within them for 30 years. You look at your own hands, at the faces of your friends, and you can't help but wonder who else carries this ticking clock inside of them. This long incubation period, stretching up to 50 years or even more, is what made the epidemic so cruel in its final stages. The number of deaths, which had peaked at a horrifying rate of over 200 per year in 1957, had dwindled to just a handful by the 1990s. But each new case was a painful reminder. It was a reopening of a wound the community was desperately trying to heal. For you, it means attending the funeral of a childhood friend, someone you thought had escaped. The grief is mixed with a profound sense of helplessness, a sorrow for a fate that was sealed half a century ago. Somehow, they managed to carry on, building a future even as the past refused to completely let go. The scientific world watched this slow fade with intense interest. Each new case was studied, documented, and added to a growing body of knowledge about this strange new kind of illness. The researchers who had first arrived in the 50s were now old men themselves. They had dedicated their lives to understanding your people's tragedy. They returned again and again, their hair now grey, their faces lined with age, but their commitment unwavering. You see them speaking with the families, their voices gentle, their questions precise. They were no longer just outsiders, they were a part of your story, bound to you by this shared scientific and human quest. Finally, the long tale of the epidemic reached its end. Don't worry, the day did come when the ghost finally receded. The last known person to die from Kuru passed away. Sources differ on the exact year, placing it in either 2005 or perhaps as late as 2009. Imagine that moment. A person who was infected as a child in the 1950s when the rituals were still practiced finally succumbs to the disease in a world of mobile phones and the internet. Their death marked the official end of a plague that had haunted your people for the better part of a century. The faucet that was turned off in 1960 had finally stopped dripping. With the end of the sickness, a new chapter could truly begin. But the story of Kuru was far from over. In fact, its most surprising legacy was only just beginning to be understood. The clue didn't lie with those who died, but with those who had survived against all odds. You look at the elders in your village, the old women who lived through the very worst of the epidemic. They attended countless funerals. They should have been the first to fall, but they didn't. And scientists wanted to know why. The answer would be found not in a ritual or a curse, but deep within your very own DNA. Let's step away from the highlands of New Guinea for a moment and into the sterile, quiet environment of a modern genetics lab. The air here smells of antiseptic and humming machinery. Instead of damp earth, the floor is cool, polished tile. Here, researchers puzzled over a remarkable question. They looked at the data from the Fore people, specifically at the elderly women who had lived right through the peak of the Kuru epidemic. According to every model, these women, who had participated in numerous mortuary feasts, should have had the highest exposure. Yet here they were, living into old age, completely healthy. You can picture these women, their faces etched with the lines of a long and difficult life, carrying a secret in their blood. To find that secret, scientists turned to the Fore themselves. In a remarkable collaboration, the survivors who had stared a deadly epidemic in the face and won provided genetic samples. They had already given their stories, their memories, and their trust. Now, they gave their very biology. Researchers analyzed their DNA, looking for anything that set them apart from those who had succumbed to the disease. What they found was a stunning example of evolution in action, happening on a timescale that was almost breathtakingly fast. Your people weren't just the victims of a disease, you were also a testament to human resilience. Deep inside their genetic code, on a gene called PRMP, many of the survivors carried a unique variation. Genes, as you know, are like recipes for building proteins. The PRMP gene is the recipe for the normal prion protein. In most people, a specific spot on this gene, codon 127, codes for an amino acid called glycine, but in these resistant Fore individuals, a tiny change, a single letter swap in the genetic alphabet, meant this spot now coded for a different amino acid, valine. This seemingly minuscule alteration, known as the G1270 polymorphism, had a profound impact. It was like changing one crucial ingredient in the recipe. The new protein that your body builds from this altered recipe is fundamentally different. It's stubborn. It refuses to be corrupted by the toxic, misfolded prions that cause Kuru. Imagine the normal prion protein is a perfectly folded piece of paper. The infectious Kuru prion comes along and tries to force it to misfold into a crumpled, sticky mess. But the protein made by the G1270 gene is like a piece of paper made of stronger, more resilient material. It simply won't crumple. Experiments in mice later confirmed this. This one tiny genetic change provided powerful, and in some cases, complete protection against not just Kuru, but all known forms of human prion disease. What had happened in the Fore population was pure Darwinian natural selection, played out over just a few generations. The Kuru epidemic had acted as a brutal, relentless filter. If you had the standard version of the PRMP gene, you were highly susceptible. You participated in the rituals, you were exposed, and you died. But if you were lucky enough to be born with the rare G1270 variant, you were protected. You survived. You went on to have children, and you passed that life-saving gene on to them. Congratulations, you have just witnessed one of the most powerful examples of natural selection ever observed in a human population. Over the decades of the epidemic, the frequency of this protective gene had increased dramatically among the Fore. It was evolution on fast forward. Another variation at a different spot on the same gene, codon 129, also played a role. Being heterozygous at this location, meaning you have two different versions of the gene, was also found to offer some resistance and lead to much longer incubation times. This genetic makeup was far more common among the elderly survivors than you would expect by chance. The bodies of your ancestors had found a way to fight back, encoding the story of their survival directly into the blueprint of life itself. Through it all, a biological defense was being forged in the crucible of tragedy. The legacy of Kuru, however, extends far beyond the remote mountain valleys of New Guinea. It reaches into laboratories and hospitals all across the modern world. The investigation into this one rare and tragic disease, affecting a small, isolated tribe, ended up completely revolutionizing our understanding of the human brain. The suffering of your people, the Fore, unintentionally provided a key that would unlock a whole new field of neuroscience. You helped introduce the world to a terrifying but vital new concept, the prion. Before Kuru, scientists believed that infectious diseases were caused exclusively by organisms like bacteria, viruses, or fungi. The idea that a simple protein with no genetic material of its own could become infectious and spread was completely alien. It was a radical concept, but the work of researchers like Carleton Gaddusek and Stanley Prisner, built on the foundations of your people's experience, proved it to be true. This discovery of self-propagating misfolded proteins provided a completely new paradigm, a new way of thinking about what can go wrong inside our own cells. You can almost feel the intellectual shockwave this sent through the scientific community. Now imagine a researcher in a lab today. They might be in Dublin or Tokyo or San Francisco. On their computer screen are complex models of proteins twisting and clumping together. Their work is focused on Alzheimer's disease, or perhaps Parkinson's or even ALS. The truth is, that researcher owes a profound debt to the Fore people. The protein misfolding concept, born from the study of Kuru, is now absolutely central to our understanding of these much more common neurodegenerative diseases. We now know that Alzheimer's involves the misfolding and aggregation of beta-amyloid and tau proteins. Parkinson's is driven by the misfolding of a protein called alpha-synuclein. These diseases operate on a prion-like principle. They aren't infectious in the same way as Kuru, but the underlying mechanism, a protein corrupting its neighbors, setting off a slow, cascading failure in the brain, is fundamentally similar. The study of your people's disease gave scientists the conceptual framework and the experimental tools to investigate these conditions that affect millions of families globally. The protective gene you carry, G127V, is now a major focus of research. If we can understand precisely how it stops the prion from misfolding, we might be able to design drugs that do the same thing for the proteins involved in Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Your genetic gift might one day protect us all. In the end, the story of Kuru is a somber tapestry woven from threads of immense tragedy and unexpected scientific light. Through it all, the Fore people were never passive subjects. As noted by historians and scientists alike, you were active participants in solving the mystery of your own affliction. You guided researchers through the treacherous terrain, you shared your family histories, you offered your trust, and ultimately, you gave your biology to the cause of understanding. Your collaboration over decades was essential. You helped transform a local curse into a universal lesson. Let's return one last time to that village in the Eastern Highlands. The air is clear now. The sounds are of life, not of mourning. The shaking sickness is a memory, a story of the grandparents, an act of love and grief. The ritual consumption of the dead to preserve their spirit tragically gave birth to a devastating plague. That plague, in turn, forced the world to discover a fundamental secret of biology. The story of the Fore is a quiet, powerful reminder. It shows us how the deepest acts of human connection can have unforeseen consequences, and how even from the most profound suffering, a glimmer of hope and knowledge can emerge for all of humanity. And with that, we gently close the case file on one of science's most profound and tragic mysteries. The last slide has been viewed under the microscope. The last link in the chain has been found, leaving only the soft echo of a world where love and a deadly protein were inextricably bound. We have felt the weight of a community's grief and seen how the fate of so many could hinge on a single misfolded molecule. As you lay in the stillness, perhaps you can still sense both the deep sorrow of the Fore women and the stark wonder of the scientists who pieced together the puzzle. Thank you for settling in with us, wherever you may be. To know we've shared this quiet exploration is a truly peaceful feeling. The investigation is over, and the knowledge of Kuru now rests with you. A like serves as your final, silent nod to the Fore people, a gesture of respect for the devastating price they paid for the wisdom they unknowingly gave the world. To subscribe is to accept your place as a keeper of these extraordinary human stories, ensuring you are summoned when the next secret, whether hidden in a forgotten ritual or a microscopic protein, is ready to be unveiled. Don't let this be a fleeting discovery, make it a permanent part of your understanding. And now, let the sound of my voice fade into the background. Your duties as a keeper are done for the night. The epidemic has passed. The genetic code has been read. There is nothing left to investigate, nothing left to solve, just the gentle pull of sleep. Let the peace of understanding settle over you, and drift into a deep and tranquil rest. The past will keep its secrets until we return. Good night.